For those of you who don't know, I am quite a big fan of the Persona series. It all started about 3 years ago when a friend of mine bought me Persona 4 Golden for my birthday. It sat around in my Steam library for a while until one day I decided to give it a try. And hoo boy, I was not disappointed. Before this, I'd never even seen anything from the Persona series, so everything was new to me. The personas, the story, the music, the characters, and believe me, it left one hell of an impression on me. The way the game blended the social sim and dungeon diving gameplay was virtually perfect as far as I was concerned, and I could not get enough of it. By the time I finished the game, I'd become fully engrossed in the Persona formula and really wanted more. I even ended up almost 100%ing the game, thanks to one certain achievement. This ended up leading me down one hell of a Persona rabbit hole, where I ended up playing Persona 5 Royal, Strikers and Tactica, as well as Persona 3 Reload when it came out. Hell, I even put over 100 hours into the Phantom X when that got released on Steam. Overall, I've put well over 600 hours into the Persona series over the years, and you can bet that number's gonna go way up when Persona 4 Revival comes out later on. Though, once I'd finished Persona 3 Reload, I realised that I'd run out of Persona games to play. I'd essentially already 100%ed Persona 4 and 5, and at the time I couldn't go back to Persona 3 since I was sharing the game with a friend. This kind of left a weird feeling in me, where I knew the type of game I wanted to play, but I also wanted something new. At this point Persona 4 Revival hadn't been announced yet, so I was just left wondering what to play next. That is, until I remembered hearing about another game. This game was made by the same studios that made the Persona games, and I'd heard it shared a lot of similarities with them as well. This game was called Metaphor ReFantazio. Much like the Persona games, Metaphor ReFantazio is a JRPG that features a mix of social sim and dungeon exploration gameplay. Many key features from the Persona series can be found within Metaphor, though they often have their own twist. Many of the features are directly taken from Persona as well, but they have a few tweaks made so they fit the style of the game a little bit better. One of these features are the social stats, which are called royal virtues in Metaphor. The royal virtues function in essentially the same way as the social stats do in Persona. There are 5 stats in total, those being courage, wisdom, tolerance, eloquence and imagination, as opposed to Persona's knowledge, guts, proficiency, kindness and charm. These stats can be raised via activities found around the world, as well as by completing missions and activities. Once raised to a high enough level, these stats allow you to access certain follower bonds, as well as other options throughout the world. This feature allows you to improve your character in other ways than just increasing overall level. While it can be a bit of a grind to achieve max level in each of these stats, the game provides you with plenty of time to do this alongside other features such as the follower bonds. Follower bonds work in a very similar way to how social links or confidants do in Persona. Within the game, there are a number of characters you can interact with that will lead to a bond forming. These bonds can then be furthered by spending time with them or by completing quests they give you. In Metaphor, each bond is made up of 8 levels, unlike the 10 levels in Persona, making them a little bit easier to complete. Each bond will take you through the story of that character as you get to know them better, each with their own troubles that you must help them with as you strengthen your bond. As you increase each of your followers' bonds, you will unlock new abilities that will assist you in battle or in your everyday life. As well as this, as you level up your bonds, you will unlock brand new archetypes related to that character that can be used to make you and your party stronger, though more on them later. Though increasing your bond level does take up some of the time within the limited amount of days you have in the game. Just like in Persona, Metaphor also features a time management system. The player is given a very specific amount of time within the game to complete quests, increase royal virtues, and enhance your follower bonds. This system is essentially the exact same as it is in Persona, limiting the amount of activities you can do in a single playthrough. However, you are given plenty of time to complete everything, if you manage your time correctly. Now, while there are other similarities between these games, they do have enough differences between them that make them clearly different between each iteration. Now, it's important to note that while I may have called Meta 4 flawed, I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this game. Many of the features I just talked about are what made the transition from Persona to Meta 4 really smooth, which was a very smart move on Atlas's part, mind you. That being said, this is not a Persona game, and you would be mistaken to think otherwise. While I do have my issues with certain aspects of the game, which we'll get into later, I want to talk about what I like about this game first, and what helps it stand out from Persona to make it its own thing. First off, I want to talk about how the story and the world building in this game are truly great and honestly one of my favourite parts of the whole game. So many elements, from the way each of the 9 tribes is seen by the general greater population, to the mysteries surrounding the truth behind the humans. Everything is laid out so well and done in a way that lets the player experience the world instead of just being told it. The Persona games are also known for their incredible stories, but honestly I think this one has all of them beat. Honestly, I could go on for quite a while if I wanted to rant about the story, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna leave it for now. But, I mean, hey, if anyone wants to hear me rant about it for a while, let me know down in the comments and I'll be more than happy to make a video about that. Another incredible element of this game for me is the music. I'll admit at first I wasn't so sure that the music was for me, but as the game continued, it really began to grow on me, and it made every scene so much better. But one of the biggest aspects that made this game great narratively speaking is about how it handled its characters. Not only do each of the main cast have engaging and interesting backstories, as well as reasons for joining a party, but even the regular characters that you can form bonds with have their own stories that really left an impact. Usually in the Persona games you had 1 or 2 social links that were a bit bland and forgettable, but I genuinely remember each of the bonds in this game, from helping Maria overcome her death of her father, to watching Alonso make himself the villain of his own town. Each character is unique, and I can't think of any of the bonds I didn't really enjoy. Another thing I want to talk about is the way they handled the time management and travelling system in this game, because honestly I'm surprised I enjoyed it as much as I did. When I first saw that it could take multiple days to travel from a town to a dungeon for a side quest, I was genuinely quite concerned that it would eat away at all the time I had to work on the bonds and royal virtues. But they made travelling something interesting as well as quite useful. While travelling, there are actually quite a few activities you can do. You can read a book to increase your royal virtues, as well as do other little jobs around the runner to help improve your overall stats, not to mention that some bonds can only be done while travelling. All this really helps make sure that it never feels like a waste of time when you have to travel to a dungeon for a mid side quest. But what really makes travelling more impactful for me is that there are events that can happen along the way. While travelling you can encounter monsters, yeah, but more importantly, you can encounter rivals in the tournament for the throne. For me, this really helps make the tournament just feel more real, since you're bumping into other competitors as you're travelling between the locations. Another element that I personally really enjoy about travelling is finding all the landmarks. It's only a small little detail, but it really helps show this world has a huge history behind it, and being able to give the pictures of these places to Maria just feels nice. Speaking of nice little features, I also want to quickly mention the sword surfing. It doesn't really impact the game or do anything notable, but honestly I just think it's a kind of cool visual and I just like it. But the aspect I'm most fond of has got to be the archetypes. Just like in Persona, each character in your team awakens to their own archetype with their own strengths and abilities. However, unlike in Persona, once an archetype is unlocked, every member of your party can use any of them, instead of just the protagonist like in the Persona series. This gives you loads more options when it comes to combat, as each character is capable of using literally anything. You can also teach archetypes different skills and abilities from other archetypes, which massively increases the versatility of each character. Now, while each of these elements are great and I genuinely love how all of them are handled, there are definitely some problems I do have with certain parts of the game. I'm going to go over all of the smaller issues first before addressing the part of the game that nearly drove me absolutely mad. My first issue is honestly a pretty personal one, which is that there are just certain events within the game that are just weirdly time restrictive. Now look, I'm someone who enjoys trying to 100% the games that I end up being pretty fond of, and Metaphor was no exception. However, one achievement in particular drove me mad. Debate me. This achievement requires you to win a debate against all other candidates. And now, winning the debates itself is actually pretty easy. Or at least, it would be if it wasn't for one slight problem. You barely have any time to complete the damn things. Now, each candidate is only around for a very specific period of time. This means that if you accidentally forget about them and go off on a side quest or something, it's very easy to just completely miss them and never get a chance to try and do a debate ever again. Honestly, what's even worse is if you are there and you end up picking the wrong option. Because if this happens, if you don't have a save that you can reload, you're gonna have to completely restart your game. Now, when I was first trying to do this achievement, I didn't realise how limited the days were with this. So when I failed them and went back the next day, the guy was gone. And I had already saved, so I couldn't go back and do it. So I had to completely start a brand new save file just to do these. And keep in mind, some of these debates happen at the end of the game. So if you make your way through the whole thing and realise you missed one person, you have to do the whole game again. I get this one is technically more of a nitpick than anything, but still, it was really annoying. Not quite done with the nitpicky issues, although this one is a bit more reasonable than the first one, and it's my issue with the very first main dungeon of the game. And the issue I have with it is just, why is it so goddamn long? Every other dungeon in the game is something that you could pretty reasonably beat in one day if you really wanted to. But this thing is just so much longer for no reason at all. In my first playthrough, I got really frustrated when I ran out of MP and had to leave halfway through the dungeon. Because to me it just feels like such a waste of time. Especially since you're really limited to the amount of days you have in the game. The worst part is, it never happens again! It's only this dungeon! Every other one is fine! It's nothing major, it's annoying. Why only this one? Moving on from that, like I said, I really do enjoy the way archetypes are handled in this game. You know, I think it's just a good system, but there is one problem I have with it, which is they just don't feel very special. In Persona, when a character unlocks a persona, that persona is theirs. You know, each of those characters have their own persona. Now, sure, the main character can use a variety of them, but even then, you have their main one they get at the beginning. Those are special personas since only those characters can use them. Whereas in Metaphor, anyone can use any of the archetypes. Now, yes, there are royal variants which are unique to each character, but, you know, it's just like, they just don't feel anywhere near as special. This one isn't really a big issue, it's just like, it's just something I noticed and it kinda sucked. It wasn't enough to make me dislike the archetypes at all though, which is good, but, you know, minor things. Now, this is the last of the smaller nitpicky issues, and it is probably the most nitpicky out of all of them, but honestly, I just kinda wish we got a better bond with Gallica. Now, I know her bond is something that goes up as the story progresses, but it just doesn't feel the same as the others, which is honestly a shame because I really like Gallica. I mean, if nothing else, the fact that the music you hear throughout the game is a spell she cast on you, I just think that's really cool, and honestly, I just kind of wish we got a better story with her. Also, there is the fact that her mage archetype is one that I like to use a lot, and it was constantly lagging behind every other bond in the game, so I was stuck using weaker archetypes. That was just a bit annoying. On to the more notable issues I have with this game, and one of them is the fact that I just wasn't really too fond of the real-time combat system they have. So in Metaphor there are two styles of combat. The main turn-based combat system, which we're all used to, but they also have a real-time combat system. Now, the real-time combat system has two main purposes. The first is stunning an opponent to give you an edge in a turn-based combat, and the other is killing a weaker enemy without having to enter turn-based combat, but you do gain less XP for it. Now, don't get me wrong, these aspects individually work and they work well, but what ended up obsessing me was when it was first introduced to me, I thought it was supposed to be possible to actually fight and defeat the enemies in this real-time combat system. But you just can't. No matter how much you beat them up, the most you will ever do is stun them unless they are already significantly weaker than you. Editor me here. So it sounds like you actually can kill enemies through real-time combat even if they're stronger than you. It just takes a very long time and is very tedious. And most of the time, they're just gonna hit you and you're gonna get into turn-based combat with a disadvantage, so it's just not really worth doing. It's not necessarily a massive problem, I guess, but it's just the way it was presented and handled, it makes it feel like I should be able to kill an enemy without having to enter the turn-based combat. And honestly, when I learnt that that's not how it works, it was quite annoying. Now this is the last of the more minor issues I have with the game before I get into the big one, but it's in regards to the difficulty. Now, you can call me a wimp or whatever, but personally I just don't enjoy hard modes in turn-based RPGs. To me, it just feels like the fights are virtually the exact same, they just take longer instead of feeling like more of an actual challenge. Because of this, I usually just leave the difficulty in normal, but not with this game. Within the first dungeon, I kept finding myself getting battered by even some of the most basic enemies. It felt like even if I made one mistake, be it my fault or otherwise, I was massively punished for it, even early on. The battle that really hammered this home was during the mini-boss battle in the first dungeon, where you have to fight 4 skeletons along with a stronger knight, when you only have 3 characters, and very little, if any, options for multi-target attacks. I ended up watching my whole team get wiped after one turn, because the enemy just had so many more turns to attack. Like, don't get me wrong, I get that I'm not the best at games and all, but it just really felt like I was getting screwed over through no real fault of my own. This wasn't a massive issue later on in the game or anything, but still, didn't like it. Now, while I do think all the things I mentioned are issues and the game would benefit from changing, at the end of the day, if they ever make a sequel to Metaphor and these problems are still there, I honestly wouldn't mind that much. But all of these issues pale in comparison to the biggest problem I have with this game, and the one element I haven't really spoken about yet: the turn-based combat. Now, I want to emphasize I don't actually hate the combat system at all. In fact, there's actually quite a few elements that I do genuinely quite like about it. The formation system is honestly a really nice addition, but allows you to be more strategic with where your characters are placed in battle. Characters that are in the front row are able to do more physical damage with physical based attacks, however they also take more damage from physical attacks. Characters in the back row take less damage from physical attacks, but their physical attacks are much weaker. This actually keeps your mages and healers safe in the back lines, while the tanks and warriors can do a lot of damage in the front. There are also a few attacks and abilities that utilise this feature, such as attacks that only hit the front or back row, or healing that only affects those in the same row. Synergy skills are also something that I actually liked quite a bit. While they can be quite expensive to use, they're a good way of dealing a lot of damage, as well as giving you access to abilities that you might not have unlocked yet. The Persona games have similar features, yes, but most of the time you aren't really able to fully control when they happen, unlike with the synergy attacks in Metaphor. This gives the player a little bit more freedom when it comes to combat. Not to mention that the types of synergy attacks also change depending on the archetype in your party, so it allows for a bit more diversity as well. Another element of the combat I'm actually quite surprised I liked as much as I did was how it handled turns. So instead of each character having one action per turn like in Persona, you instead have turn icons. Now, I'll admit this does take some getting used to, especially if you're coming from Persona, but I think it's a pretty good system, as it can stop either you or the enemy from doing infinite one more loops on you like it does in the Persona games. It also means that you have to be way more strategic with how you play, since some moves can take more turn icons, while using an effective move or a crit only uses half an icon. And one last little thing that I just like is the fact that if the protagonist goes down at all, the fight doesn't just instantly end. It's not a major thing, it's just nice to know that you're not at risk of losing a fight because one character got hit by an unlucky crit randomly. Now, like I said, while I do generally enjoy most of the combat in this game, there are a few aspects of it that, when they happen, drive me absolutely mad. To the point that I would frequently lose my shit every time they happened. Now, the first issue I have is more of a minor one admittedly, but it's an issue nonetheless, which is to do with this game's absolute reliance on MP. This issue is really apparent in the first dungeon of the game, where the main enemies, being skeletons, are weak to light and strike type attacks. Now, at this point in the game, the options for strike damage are very limited, meaning your best option is going to be light type attacks. But the problem is, these are all based around MP. Considering skeletons are the most common enemy type in this dungeon, you end up running out of MP really fast, and with a very limited amount of options to actually restore it during the dungeon itself. This is made even worse when you learn that almost all of the abilities in the game use MP. Very few of them use anything else such as money or HP. This means that more often than not, you will run out of MP midway through a dungeon. And while you can use basic attacks, a fair few enemies resist them, and they're also just really weak in comparison to your regular abilities. This means you are incredibly reliant on MP, and while this does get a bit better as you progress through the game, MP is still something that you will be really heavily relying on throughout the whole thing. Now, you could argue that you were also heavily reliant on MP in the Persona games, which is true to a certain degree, but the main differences are, in Persona, you have a lot more options for attack that don't just use MP, as well as the fact that there are actually a lot more ways to restore your MP. This makes reliance feel less detrimental when it doesn't metaphor, at least in my opinion anyway. Moving on to what I consider more major issues with the combat now, and the first one is the punishment you receive for missing an attack. Now, in most games, the punishment you receive for missing an attack is, well, the fact that you missed an attack, essentially meaning that you just wasted a turn. This, however, is not how it works in Metaphor. When you miss an attack in Metaphor, you lose not one, but 2 turn icons. Essentially meaning you miss out on 2 of the turns for something that was 90% of the time completely out of your control. Now, admittedly this rule does affect the enemies as well, but in the early game, when you're fighting a large group of enemies, missing an attack can more often than not result in you getting absolutely curb stomped to the fucking ground by whatever it is you happen to be fighting at the time. Now, this confused me so much, because I just couldn't understand why they did this. It's not like I was the one making a mistake, most of the time I just got unlucky, so why am I being punished so badly for it? But this doesn't even compare to what happens if an enemy repels or absorbs your attack. If an enemy either absorbs or repels your attack, not only does it negate the attack you just did, but it completely removes all your remaining turn icons. Keep in mind, this is a game where you need to test different types of attacks on enemies to find out their weaknesses. This means it is fully possible for you to face a brand new enemy, test if it's weak to, for example, fire, just for it to absorb your attack, and for it to completely end your turn without any other character being able to do a thing. Who the fuck thought this was a good idea? Why are you being punished for partaking in an essential element of the combat system? The worst part is, repel is even worse, because not only does your turn fully end if an enemy repels your attack, but it bounces back all the damage you would have done. This is made even worse by the fact that you are often hitting enemies much harder than the enemies are hitting you. So when the attack is repelled, there is a pretty damn good chance your character just instantaneously fucking dies. The worst part is, there's nothing you can do about it since you're supposed to check what elements affect the enemies. Now, again, these rules do apply to the enemies as well, but it is so much harder for you to utilize this, since you are very limited on options to give yourself immunities or repels from an attack type. More often than not, you'll be testing attacks on an enemy only to get one shot out of nowhere. This was always so incredibly annoying, since you have to waste turns and items just to bring back the character, when they shouldn't have even died in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong, while losing turn icons sucks, what can be even worse is when the enemy just casually gives themselves a bunch of extra turn icons instead. Now, there are multiple moves that do this, but the worst one, by far, is a move called Soul Scream. This move gives the enemies 4 extra turn icons within their turn. Now, while there are other variants that give 2 or 3 extra turns, Soul Scream is something that almost all of the late game bosses have and will use at some point. This means you are forced to sit there as a boss just casually doubles its turn icons and proceeds to absolutely annihilate you out of nowhere. Sometimes this is triggered by you repelling an attack, by the way, so you're actually being punished for preparing for a fight. Editing me here, so despite the fact that I can distinctly remember being punished with Soul Scream when I reflected an enemy's attack, I could not find the bosses that did this. Now, I'm pretty confident that at least a few of them do this, but I could not find any that did it, so, If anyone knows which bosses do this, please leave it in the comments below, because I, quite frankly, cannot find them. Which, is incredibly annoying. Now, there is a way you can do this for yourself, by learning the move Hero's Cry, which also gives you 4 extra turn icons. However, not only is it very expensive to use MP-wise, but it can also only be used once per battle, unlike Soul Scream, which the bosses have a tendency of spamming. Speaking of boss fights, another element about boss battles that I find incredibly annoying in turn-based games as a whole is when there's a turn limit. Now, I don't know about you, but I absolutely hate it when I've been fighting a boss for 20 minutes, slowly chipping away at its health, just for it to suddenly start using a one-hit KO move or suddenly gaining a massive power boost out of thin fucking air. This is especially annoying when you're right on the verge of beating it, just to end up getting insta-killed because they decided that you are taking a bit too long to do it. Now, this is an issue with a lot of other turn-based games, not just Metaphor, but, we're talking about Metaphor and this issue occurs, so I'm gonna bring it up. I mean, honestly, I've never understood the logic behind it. Why am I being punished for trying to be more cautious and taking a battle slowly? I just don't get it. Another similar aspect to this is when you work really hard to get a special super strong move, like in Metaphor where you can get a 9999 damaging move. Keep in mind that most of the time this barely even scratches the boss that you're fighting. And you go to use it against a boss to get an initial little bit of damage done. Which is when the boss then proceeds to use that 9999 damage move on you non-stop as a punishment. I mean, why? Why is this a thing? I mean, seriously, why am I being punished for using a super strong move, which, keep in mind, I had to go out of my way and work towards to earn? Like, seriously, what's the point in having the move if you can't use it on the strongest bosses unless you are sure it is going to kill them? Like, what's the point of getting the damn thing? I don't get it. Editing note here. So, while getting footage for this fight to show how unfair it is that if I use the ultimate attack, I instantly get killed for it, I learned that in this fight, if you even have a piece of equipment that makes you nullify or repel any type of attack on you, you will instantly get punished for it. I don't even have to do a move. I could literally not hit the bastard, and my entire party will get one shot simply because I had an item that gave me an extra nullification. Who thought this was a good idea? I don't get it. Anyway, back to whatever I'm talking about. Moving away from specifically boss battles now, and another element that I've found incredibly annoying to deal with in Metaphor is how they've handled status elements. So, in Metaphor, status elements are split into two categories, those being physical and mental. Mental ailments are ailments that wear off after a battle is done, whereas physical ailments persist after a battle. Now, not all of these are really annoying to deal with. Poison is just general poison, and frostbite as well just makes you do a little bit less damage, but there are some that are genuinely agonizing to deal with. Daze is an ailment that decreases accuracy, which generally isn't too bad, until you remember just how badly you are punished for missing an attack in this game. Anxiety stops the afflicted character from being able to use their archetype. You know, a bit annoying, but nothing too serious. Except for the small detail that an enemy who hits a character with anxiety won't lose a turn icon. Sleep means if the character is hit, it is always a critical, which means not only do you take more damage, but the attacker only uses up half a turn icon. Also, I'd like you to keep in mind, these are just the mental ailments. Burn means you take extra damage when you are hit. Hex makes it so you take half of any damage you deal to an enemy, along with giving you an increased weakness to dark type attacks, as well as making you more susceptible to other ailments. Keep in mind, once again, you do a lot more damage to the enemies than they do to you, so that 50% damage dealt back is gonna really hurt. But one of the worst ones is an ailment called Malady, which lowers every single one of your stats, making you weaker both offensively and defensively, as well as making it more likely that you'll be hit and less likely that you'll land a hit. But not only that, while affected, it is also impossible to restore that character's HP or MP until the effect is cured. Keep in mind, this is a physical ailment, which means it stays even after battle. I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I straight up hate the ailments in this game. They're so bad. Like, I don't know who thought they were a good idea. They're just so bad. Now, each of these bits are pretty bad individually, but you know, usually you don't have to deal with more than one of these in a fight. Emphasis on the usually, because there are a series of fights that actively will use almost all of these against you. Those being the 3 dragon bosses in the Dragon Trials. Towards the end of the game, you gain access to 3 dragon trials. These trials send you through a tower where you must beat a dragon boss at the top. The enemies in the towers are usually pretty easy to deal with, but the bosses at the top are another story entirely. Each dragon has its own gimmick which it uses. While there is no specific order you have to fight the dragons in, there is one that you essentially have to do last, but we'll get into that in a bit. The first dragon, the Devourer of Nations, is easy enough. It hits hard and has a lot of health and all, but it doesn't really have any particularly annoying gimmicks to deal with. Once you beat it, you get the Cardinal Dragon Raiment, which is crucially important for the third and final dragon. The next dragon, the Devourer of Stars, is where the gimmicks start to happen. Firstly, they repel all forms of damage except Almighty. Now, when I first battled this boss, I went into it completely blind, and watched my characters die over and over again as I tested each element, only to learn that I had no means of actually doing any damage. Keep in mind, the game doesn't tell you this, by the way. I had to look it up because I thought I was going mad and had missed something. But no, you have to use Almighty. The only other way to deal damage is by using a move that gives it a temporary weakness. Oh, and keep in mind, on top of this, at the very beginning of the fight, this little fucker uses a move that reduces the maximum HP of your entire party to 300, which is quite a significant decrease. Oh, and this lasts for the whole battle, by the way. Oh yeah, not to mention it also uses a move that poisons your whole team. This one is, easier to deal with, but still very annoying. Yeah, this fight fucking sucks. Because the game just doesn't tell you anything. If you don't already know to bring Almighty attacks, then there's a pretty good chance that you're not even going to be able to damage the thing. Now, once you eventually do beat the dragon, it gives you the Cardinal Dragon Robe, which once again is another essential piece of armor for the final dragon fight. The last dragon is the Devourer of Flames, and it is the worst by far. You see, the second dragon is annoying and all, but if you know what you're getting into, you can prepare for it pretty easily. But the third dragon is an entirely different story. This dragon uses a unique move every 3 turns that deals 9999 fire damage to the whole team. This is why you need to be the other dragons first, as the Cardinal Dragon Raiment and the Cardinal Dragon Robe make you completely immune to fire. There are 2 other items that do the same, but there's a pretty damn good chance you may either miss these or simply have not been able to get them by the time you're going to face this dragon. These items are essentially required, as there is literally nothing you can do to stop yourself from being one-shot by this attack otherwise. Most of the time, you're pretty likely to only have 2 characters who can survive the attack, meaning you have to spend a turn reviving the rest of your team, as well as healing them back up before you can start attacking again. Now, while there's nothing special you have to do to defeat this one, you also have to contend with its ability to charm your team, which makes your team members attack each other or even heal the boss. This, combined with a 9999 damaging move, makes this dragon an absolute nightmare to deal with. Now, yes, I will admit, if you have the items that make your team immune to fire, it will be an incredibly easy fight. But not only are you unlikely to have all 4 items to do this, you wouldn't even know you needed them until you're already fighting the bastard. Now, realistically, these dragon fights aren't actually that hard if you know what to do and properly prepare for it. But the problem is that the game doesn't give you any information about them, so it's practically impossible to prepare for them unless you're either replaying the game or playing through with a guide. Because seriously, you have no other way of knowing, and you end up getting screwed over through no fault of your own. Honestly, the dragon fights pretty much sum up most of the issues I have with this game. There are several parts where you are either super harshly punished for something completely out of your control, or you're just left completely in the dark, which leads to you getting your ass absolutely destroyed. Now look, personally I dislike gimmick fights in general. I just find them incredibly frustrating like 90% of the time. But that doesn't mean that all gimmick fights are bad. Hell, even earlier on in Metaphor when you are fighting Heismei, you need to pay attention to which clone has a shadow to tell which version is the real one. That gimmick works because it's clearly stated that he is a stealthy person, and there's a very obvious way to figure it out. Although I will admit, when I first did it, I did not figure it out and was losing my mind until I eventually learned it was a shadow. But with the dragons, there's just nothing like that to go on outside of just trial and error. Look, if I'm being fully honest, the issues with the combat in this game are pretty much the only thing that stopped this game from being a 10 out of 10 for me. Which is such a shame because just about everything else in this game is amazing and I absolutely love it. It's been about 6 months now since I fully 100%ed Metaphor, and honestly, after thinking about it, I think that this game might be one of, if not my favourite game that I've ever played. I'm pretty sure it easily tops the Persona series now. And worst bit is, I can't fully explain why, but I just genuinely love this game. The story, the characters, the world are all so amazingly done. And while I do evidently have my issues with it, they don't really detract too much from the main experience. It seems Atlus is pretty determined to turn Metaphor into a series just like Persona, and I am fully down for that. While I do hope they change some of the issues I had, especially concerning the combat, you can bet that whenever the next game comes out, I will be one of the first people playing it. Just like the title says, Metaphor ReFantazio may have its flaws, but I consider it an absolute masterpiece, and I cannot wait to play more. For those of you who made it to the end, I just want to give you a huge thank you. I know I dogged on this game quite a lot during the video, but that is only because of how much I genuinely love the thing. I know this isn't my usual style of video, but I kinda just wanted to have a chance to talk about one of my favourite games. If you enjoyed the type of video though, then let me know in the comments, and I'll probably make another one at some point. There are a good few games that I'll be more than happy to ramble about, so if you're interested in that, let me know. I mean, at some point in the future, I'm probably going to make a video about Metaphor, about actually playing the game, but you know, that's something for the future. But yeah, that's about all I have to talk about today, so with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.